True Horror Stories.
One of my closest friends growing up used to talk about his aunt like she was something out of a fairy tale. Not the magical kind, just impossibly kind. The sort of person who baked extra bread for neighbors she barely knew. She stopped to help strangers change tires in the rain, and remembered everyone's birthday without writing it down. If goodness had a shape, it would have looked like her. Then she met a man. At first, everyone thought he adored her for the same reason everyone else did. He watched her constantly, like he was fascinated by the way she moved, how she smiled at waiters, how she waved at people across the street. He told her she had the warmest heart he'd ever known. But after a few weeks, something in him twisted. He started asking strange questions. Why had she smiled at the cashier for so long? Why did she hug her friends? He said it felt wrong, intimate, like pieces of her belonged to other people. One night, he told her that kindness was supposed to mean something. That it wasn't something you scattered everywhere like confetti. That when two people were together, truly together, the good parts of them should belong only to each other. She laughed at first. She thought he was just joking. But he wasn't. Neighbors later said they heard shouting that night. Just anger, furniture scraping. Then a long, terrible silence. What investigators found inside was something they never forgot. The kitchen looked almost normal except for the blood. The man later told police he needed to see it, the thing that made her give herself away so easily to everyone. He said he wanted to take her heart out so it could finally belong to him alone. But the part that always haunted my friend wasn't just what he did. It was what the man said when they arrested him. He insisted he could still feel it beating in his hands. Even though by the time the police arrived, it had already stopped. For years after, my friend couldn't stand hearing people say someone had a good heart. The phrase made his stomach twist. He'd seen what can happen when the wrong person becomes obsessed with owning the goodness in someone else. And that's the part that still scares me. Not the violence or the madness, but the quiet realization. Somewhere out there are people who don't see kindness as something beautiful to share, only something they want to possess. Sometimes the very thing that makes someone the most loved is the thing that puts them in the most danger.
It was my second night ever driving an Uber. Around 2 a.m., the kind of hour where the roads feel abandoned. I got a pickup request in the middle of nowhere outside Denville, New Jersey. The pin on the map sat deep in a patch of woods. The directions took me off the road onto this narrow dirt path. My tires crunched over gravel while trees crowded in on both sides. The woods suddenly opened into a clearing. There was this old barn leaning sideways like it had been dying for years. Hanging from a tree was the rusted rear bucket of a truck, swinging in the breeze. It was filled to the brim with crushed beer cans. Then I saw movement. A guy stepped out of the woods. He was chugging a beer, one arm raised like he was signaling a taxi. He crushed the can and tossed it into the hanging bucket, without even looking. It clanged against the others. He walked over and climbed into the back seat of my car. Didn't say a word. We pulled away from the clearing. The silence was getting uncomfortable, so I tried making conversation. "How was your night, man?" He answered immediately. "Good, man. Just hung out with friends. Got drunk. Met some girls. Then we all went out and dropped acid." "Oh, wow. I was wondering if this dude was hallucinating and seeing me as some demon chauffeur dragging him through the woods. So, how'd you end up out there? There aren't any bars near where I picked you up." Silence. No answer. I glanced at the rearview mirror. He was staring straight at me, not blinking, just locked onto my eyes. I looked back at the road, trying to play it cool. After a few seconds, I checked the mirror again, still staring. The ride went on like that for 10 more minutes, no talking, just the feeling of someone watching you too closely. Finally, curiosity got the better of me. "So, what were you doing out there in the woods?" This time he answered. His voice sounded calmer than before. "Oh, that's where we always go after the bar." "Why?" I asked. There was a long pause behind me. Then he said quietly, "We left someone there." I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean?" Another pause. Then he spoke again. Pull over. I slowed the car and stopped on the side of the empty road. I heard his footsteps crunch on the gravel as he got out. He was standing a few feet behind the car, still staring straight at me through the rear window. Then he slowly raised his hand and pointed back down the road. Back toward the woods. Don't ever pick anyone up there again, he said. And then he turned around and walked straight into the darkness. I sat there for a long time before I finally drove away. I kept checking my mirrors the whole way home, half expecting to see him sitting back there again, staring. I never went near that part of the woods ever again. In the early 1920s, not far from the village where my family lived, there was a story that older relatives would only tell. When the conversation drifted late into the night, a quiet man lived at the edge of town with his wife, her mother, and her 3 children from a previous marriage. He kept mostly to himself. People remembered him as polite but distant, the kind of neighbor who nodded hello, but never stopped to talk. For a while, everything seemed ordinary.
Ow.
Then one week, the family simply vanished. The man told neighbors his wife had taken the children to visit relatives. No one questioned it too much at first. Still, something about the house felt wrong. The windows were shuttered, the yard had gone untended, and the man had begun acting even stranger. Around that same time, my great-uncle and his father, my great-grandfather, went hunting in the woods a few miles outside town. It was late autumn, cold enough that the ground was hard and the air carried every sound. They had brought along their hunting dog, a stubborn old hound that usually stayed close. That day, the dog suddenly bolted into the trees. My great-uncle followed. The barking led him down a narrow path to a clearing where an old root cellar had been dug into a hillside. Near the entrance lay a burlap sack half covered with leaves. He thought it might be a poacher's discarded game, or maybe spoiled potatoes. Curious, he nudged the sack open. Inside was something he never forgot. The severed head of one of the missing children. Said his mind went completely blank. The forest was quiet except for the dog still barking somewhere behind him. Then he felt something strange, the sense that he wasn't alone. When he looked up, the man from the house was standing just steps away. In his hands, he held another burlap sack. For a moment, neither of them moved. The man looked more surprised than angry, as if he'd been caught in the middle of something he thought no one would ever see. Just then, his father crashed through the brush with a shotgun. Seeing another adult there must have broken the moment. The man dropped the sack and ran into the trees. The 2 of them didn't chase him. Went straight back to town and told the local police. When officers searched the property, they uncovered the rest of the truth. The man was arrested while trying to leave the area. My great-uncle said he could remember 2 things with perfect clarity: the sound of the dog barking in the woods, and the look on that man's face when their eyes met in the clearing. Even decades later, he would always pause at that part as if he were standing in that cold forest again.
A friend of mine once told me a story about her best friend that still unsettles me when I think about it. Her parents were out of town for a long weekend, so she had the house to herself. It was just a normal night. She made dinner, watched TV for a while, and scrolled on her phone. The house felt a little too quiet once the lights were off, but she brushed it off. Old houses creak, pipes make noises. You hear things more when you're alone. She fell asleep facing the wall, with her closet behind her. Sometime in the middle of the night, she woke up suddenly. Just that strange instinctive jolt when your brain senses something isn't right. That's when she heard it. A slow creak. The closet door opening. Every muscle in her body locked up. Her eyes stayed closed immediately. Something in her gut told her not to move. She slowed her breathing and pretended to stay asleep. For a moment there was only silence, then the sound of soft footsteps on the carpet. Someone was in her room. They stood there for a long time. She could feel it, someone just standing in the darkness looking at her. Then the footsteps began moving, slowly. They walked around the foot of the bed to the side she was facing. The air felt different now, closer, warmer. Whoever it was standing just inches away from her face. She could hear breathing that wasn't hers. Then a hand reached out and touched her hair. It was slow, careful. The fingers gently brushed strands away from her face, like someone who didn't want to wake her. The hand moved to her cheek, lightly tracing her skin, almost tender. Her heart was pounding so hard she was convinced the person could hear it. The hand lingered there for several seconds, then it slowly pulled away. The footsteps moved back across the room. The closet door creaked shut. She stayed frozen for what felt like forever before grabbing her phone and quietly calling her boyfriend. She begged him to come over immediately. Then she called her parents. Then the police. When officers arrived, they searched the entire house. At first, they found nothing. No broken windows, no forced doors. Then one of them noticed the dog door in the back door. The family didn't even have a dog anymore, and it wasn't locked. Behind the house was a thick wooded area. When they searched it, they found a small campsite hidden deep in the trees. A cheap tent, food wrappers, empty bottles. Inside the tent was a backpack. Inside the backpack were dozens of memory cards. What was on them made everything worse. Hundreds of photos, hours of video, most of them taken through her bedroom window. Some taken inside the house, videos of her cooking, walking down the hallway, and hours of footage of her sleeping. The police believed he'd been living in those woods for months, sneaking in through the dog door whenever the house was empty. But the most disturbing thing was the timestamps, because the videos didn't start a few weeks earlier. They went years back. The footage from that night wasn't the first time someone had stood next to her bed. It was just the first time she woke up.